video, we're going to continue our study of the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas. Moving on to question 4 of part 1. The subject of this question is the perfection of God. The perfection of God. So let's read through the the question and its parts together, and I'll simply make a few comments as we go if I find any places that I believe would cause students some difficulty. So, question 4, the perfection of God. Having considered the divine simplicity in question 3, we treat next of God's perfection. Now, because everything insofar as it is perfect is called good, we shall speak first of the divine perfection, and secondly, of the divine goodness. Concerning the first, there are 3 points of inquiry. Number 1, whether God is perfect. Number 2, whether God is perfect universally, as having in himself the perfections of all things. And thirdly, whether creatures can be said to be like God. And these 3 questions, which make up this study of the perfection of God, will be covered in 3 articles here under question 4. So article number 1, question 4, article 1, whether God is perfect. St. Thomas says, it is written in Matthew chapter 5, our Lord says, "Be you perfect, as also your heavenly Father is perfect." And St. Thomas writes, as Aristotle relates in the 12th book of the Metaphysics, some ancient philosophers, namely the Pythagoreans and Leucippus, did not predicate best and most perfect of the first principle. The reason was that the ancient philosophers considered only a material principle, and a material principle is most imperfect. For since matter as such is merely potential, the first material principle must be simply potential, and thus most imperfect. Now God is the first principle, not material, but in the order of the efficient cause, which must be most perfect. For just as matter as such is merely potential, an agent as such is in the state of actuality. Hence, the first active principle must needs be most actual, and therefore most perfect. For a thing is perfect in proportion to its state of actuality, because we call that perfect which lacks nothing of the mode of its perfection. So, St. Thomas obviously teaches that God is perfect, but he explains this philosophically, referring back to Aristotle, and then speaking in terms of principles, efficient causes, actuality and potentiality, and so on. And as I always say, in modern circles, we can pretend that the Catholic curriculum can be filled with mathematics and science studies, and that philosophy can be neglected. But for us to study Catholic theology, it assumes that we know classical philosophy. And so this just sends us back to the philosophy curriculum to study Aristotle's metaphysics and the organon and so on. Now, to summarize just very simply what St. Thomas says here is that in the last line he says, a thing is perfect in proportion to its state of actuality. And so we've got this philosophical idea of potentiality and actuality. To put this simply, if we were to take man as a species, and we were to define man and say that man is a rational creature, man is pedestrious, he walks on the earth, he is biped, he has 2 feet. If we were to list all of the different attributes of men, we would have in our minds a conception that is the potentiality of man. It's potential. It's not an actual man. It's just the idea of man. And then when a man is actually created, by birth, when man is actually produced at birth, that concept of man, that potentiality, is actualized in matter and form. In other words, it takes on a body. This is the idea of the incarnation. In the beginning was the Word. That is, as regards Jesus' humanity, he existed in potentiality. As regards his deity, he existed in perfect actuality. And yet in John chapter 1, verse 14, we read, "And the Word was made flesh," that is, was actualized, "and dwelt among us." So what began as a divine idea or concept of the incarnate Son of God, what existed as an idea, became flesh, actually was actualized and dwelt among us. So the incarnation provides us with a good example of what actualization means, moving from idea or concept to actual material body. Now, with regard to God, because God is a spirit, God has no body. Therefore, in being a spirit, God actually is perfectly actualized. There's no potentiality in God, as we've said before. God, the idea of God does not require that he take on a body, and so God as a spirit is not potential waiting to become a body. He is in existence all that he can be or will be or ever has been. He's perfect. He's completely actualized according to his essence. So that's the idea here, that a thing is perfect in proportion to its state of actuality. Now, to give some other ideas to think about, if a man is born crippled, let's say a man is born blind, or a man is born with no legs, the idea, philosophically speaking, is that that man is not perfect, because he is not the perfect actualization of the concept of man. For example, if a man is born with no legs, and among the attributes of the species man is that he is pedestrious, he's 2-footed, and a man is born with no legs, that man is man, the created man is man in terms of his species, but he's an imperfect man. He's not a fully actualized man because he's lacking his legs, or he's lacking eyesight, or he's lacking some other quality that's natural to man. And so that's the idea. So if a creature is born imperfect, what we mean is that the conception of that creature is not perfectly actualized. And with regards to God, God is perfectly actualized, and therefore he is perfect. Okay? So that's St. Thomas's answer to that first question, whether God is perfect. God is perfect. Second article, whether the perfections of all things are in God. Whether the perfections of all things are in God. St. Thomas quotes Dionysius and says that God, in his one existence, prepossesses all things. God, in his one existence, prepossesses all things. And St. Thomas goes on to say, all created perfections are in God. All created perfections are in God. Hence, he is spoken of as universally perfect, because he lacks not any excellence which may be found in any genus. And there's a note there that says the commentator. The commentator is Averroes. That's the Arabian commentator on Aristotle's philosophy, the commentator. So just to review that, all created perfections are in God. He is spoken of as universally perfect because he lacks not any excellence which may be found in any genus. This may be seen from two considerations. So here's the proof that God is universally perfect. First, because whatever perfection exists in an effect must be found in the effective cause, or the cause of that effect. Whatever perfection exists in an effect must be found in the effective cause, either in the same formality, if it is a univocal agent, as when man reproduces man, or in a more eminent degree, if it is an equivocal agent. Thus, in the Son is the likeness of whatever is generated by the Son's power. Now, it is plain that the effect pre-exists virtually in the efficient cause. The effect pre-exists virtually in the efficient cause. And although to pre-exist in the potentiality of a material cause is to pre-exist in a more imperfect way, since matter as such is imperfect, and an agent as such is perfect. Still, to pre-exist virtually in the efficient cause is to pre-exist not in a more imperfect, but in a more perfect way. Since therefore God is the first effective cause of things, the perfections of all things must pre-exist in God in a more eminent way. Dionysius implies the same line of argument, saying of God, quote, "It is not that he is this and not that, but that he is all, and the cause of all," unquote. Secondly, from what has already been proved, God is existence itself, of itself subsistent. Consequently, he must contain within himself the whole perfection of being. For it is clear that if some hot thing has not the whole perfection of heat, this is because heat is not participated in its full perfection. But if this heat were self-subsisting, nothing of the virtue of heat would be wanting to it. Since therefore God is subsisting being itself, nothing of the perfection of being can be wanting in him. Now, all created perfections are included in the perfection of being. For things are perfect precisely so far as they have being after some fashion. It follows, therefore, that the perfection of no one thing is wanting to God. This line of argument, too, is implied by Dionysius when he says that, quote, "God exists not in any single mode, but embraces all being within himself, absolutely, without limitation, uniformly. And after that, he adds, he is the very existence to subsisting things. And that's St. Thomas's answer to Article 2 of Question 4, which is whether the perfections of all things are in God. His answer to that question is yes. The perfection of all things, the perfections of all things are in God. They pre-exist in God as the efficient cause of them all. The third and final article for question 4 is whether any creature can be like God. Whether any creature can be like God. Quoting Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, St. Thomas says, "It is written, 'Let us make man to our image and likeness.'" And then, quoting 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, he says, when he shall appear, we shall be like to him. St. Thomas writes, since likeness is based upon agreement or communication in form, since likeness is based upon agreement or communication in form, it varies according to the many modes of communication in form. Some things are said to be like, which communicate in the same form according to the same formality and according to the same mode. These are said to be not merely like, but equal in their likeness. As two things equally white are said to be alike in whiteness. And this is the most perfect likeness, equality. In another way, we speak of things as alike which communicate in form according to the same formality, though not according to the same measure, but according to more or less, or by degree. As something less white is said to be like another thing that is more white. That's another sense in which the term like is used. First, St. Thomas said it's used in the sense of equality, and here we see when something is like another thing with regard to some quality in degree. In a third way, some things are said to be alike which communicate in the same form, but not according to the same formality, as we see in non-univocal agents. For since every agent reproduces itself so far as it is an agent, and everything acts according to the manner of its form, the effect must in some way resemble the form of the agent. If therefore the agent is contained in the same species as its effect. I'll repeat that. If the agent is contained in the same species as its effect, there will be a likeness in form between that which makes and that which is made, according to the same formality of the species, as man produces man. If, however, the agent and its effect are not contained in the same species, there will be a likeness, but not according to the formality of the same species, as things generated by the sun's heat may be in some sort spoken of as like the sun, not as though they received the form of the sun in its specific likeness, but in its generic likeness. And let me just say there that we have to remember that the words specific and general or generic relate to genus and species, okay? So, just to repeat that, things generated by the sun's heat may be in some way spoken of as like the sun, not as though they received the form of the sun in its specific likeness, or likeness according to the same species, but in its generic likeness. Therefore, if there is an agent not contained in any genus, its effect will still more distantly reproduce the form of the agent, not, that is, so as to participate in the likeness of the agent's form, according to the same specific or generic formality, but only according to some sort of analogy or comparison, similitude, as existence is common to all. In this way, all created things, so far as they are beings, are like God, as the first and universal principle of all being. So in answer to the third question raised in this third article, whether any creature can be like God, St. Thomas takes some time to clarify that the phrase like or likeness can be used in a number of different ways. One way is with regard to equality, which is perfect likeness. Obviously, we cannot be like God. No creature can be like God in terms of equality. The other way is where two things belong to the same species and they differ in degree and yet are like one another in some way, and we cannot be like God in that sense. No creature can be like God in that sense. But in the third way, two things are said to be like one another analogically, or by means of a comparison or similitude. And in that third way, creatures can be said to be like God. So, whether any creature can be like God, the answer is yes, analogically, in that one way. So, in these three articles, St. Thomas has dealt with the question of the perfection of God, whether God is perfect. St. Thomas said, yes, God is perfect, because in God there is no potentiality. God is perfect actualization, since his being is a spirit, and he exists in the perfection of that spirit. He's not like a conception that needs to be actualized by becoming man or becoming some other material form. So God is perfect. Secondly, whether all of the perfections of all things are present in God, St. Thomas said yes. All of the perfections of things that are created, all of the effects and the perfections of effects are pre-existent in the agent or the efficient cause from which they come. So St. Thomas answered yes to that second question. And then thirdly, whether creatures can be said to be like God, St. Thomas clarified that we need to establish the meaning or sense of the word like when we talk like this, because it can be used in a number of different ways. He gives three ways. He says in two of these ways, creatures cannot be like God, but in one of these ways, analogically, creatures can be said to be like God by way of comparison. Okay, so that gives us our answer to the three questions investigated under question 4, whether God is perfect. I hope that's a helpful introduction to this lesson on question 4 of part 1 in the Summa Theologica. Study this lesson for mastery. If there's anything in there that you'd like more clarification on, feel free to contact me anytime, and I'd be happy to help you. I hope this is helpful. God bless your studies.